Hi everyone. Welcome to the recap of Season 1 CX in the Wild podcast. I wanted to make this video just to maybe elaborate on some of the people that I spoke to, what I found interesting about them, share with you, some of my inner thoughts. Maybe this is sort of like one of those recaps on like one of those HBO shows or something. It's a little behind the scenes. Anyway, enough about me and the show. Let's talk about the guests that were on the show. And for those of you who don't know what CX in the Wild is, CX in the Wild is a project that I'm working on. As I've been flying around to different events, different places in the world, I've met some incredible people doing some incredible things. Sometimes it's just stuff that they say that catches my ear, and what I'm doing is I'm just going over and saying, hey, would you like to be on CX in the Wild podcast? I sit down wherever we are, I throw some mics on us, and as I get to know them and hear about what they're doing, you get to hear about them and what they're doing. So I thought that was a cool format, so that's why I did it. For those of you who haven't listened to all the podcasts or just a couple of them, let's talk about the important stuff, the people. While I was in Dubai at Expo 2020, covering what is literally and figuratively the most amazing customer experience on earth, as well as produced by some of the most amazing people on earth, I happened to bump into a guy named Mark Karches. He's a CX consultant there in Dubai. He and I were meeting in this hotel lobby just to get to know each other, like, hey, network. And he started saying stuff that was so profound and enlightened me in terms of my own perspectives of CX that I just thought, this is the time, this is the moment to do CX in the Wild. He was the first episode, threw the mics down, got to know him. You can listen to the podcast. However, what's important about Mark, I think, is a couple of things. His perspective, he immediately came at me with, customer experience has been around with us since the beginning of humankind. The first time one person had to convince another person to do something or buy something or trade something, we had customer experience. And I thought that was an interesting perspective because it wasn't coming from the perspective of tools or process or industry. He was really talking about the essence of customer experience. So we got into it. In that conversation, he, of course, talked about customer experiences and then differentiated between customer experiences and customer experience management. If you've been in the conversation for a while, people in sort of the Middle East have a strong differentiation between the management and customer experience as a business practice. So that's just something I was aware of, but he also reiterated that. So I thought that was an interesting cultural perspective from around the world. The other thing I think in summary that he elaborated upon that I thought about was not exceeding customer expectations. And he talked about not wanting all of the customers or setting the expectations of customers. And he used the example of a low-cost airline. Low-cost airline, maybe the experiences aren't the premium or the best experiences for an airline. However, those customers have their needs and their wants and their expectations met. And for that reason, those businesses thrive. So if you want to hear a discussion about the beginning of customer experience, philosophies, and not exceeding customer expectations and the strategic reasons why, I think Mark Karches is a fantastic episode. So that's episode 1 of the podcast. Episode 2, I bumped into this guy, Jimmy Shabat. Jimmy Shabat runs a company called PlayZizo. This company caught my eye. First of all, his booth at these trade shows is very engaging, visually stunning, colorful. It's gamification of employee experiences. So it has that come look at me factor. But I did, and once I was drawn into it, it opened my eyes about a number of things in terms of, is the market ready for a change in the way that we engage with employees? I've seen a lot of conversations on the internet recently about the disillusionment of modern workers, the great resignation That was a theme for a while. Quiet quitting. We hear all these things. So I think there are red flags or signals going up in the marketplace about how the expectations of the modern employee have changed by the generation, but also through COVID. And businesses that want to thrive in this part of change will be required to adopt tools like Zizzo, and it's at PlayZizzo, PlayZizzo.com. Zizzo, it takes an interface, it puts the employee at the center of the interface instead of the business. That's step one. Step two, it allows workers to engage with each other in a new kind of context that lets people know where they stand in the context of their team, their peers, their business, which I think cuts down significantly on office politics. But I also think that there's this transparency between the employer and the worker that isn't available in most businesses today. I think that in some ways, we talk about it in the podcast, it's in some ways an antidote to the Great Resignation or quiet quitting. I think that the bottom line is this guy Jimmy is a champion for the modern worker. I've seen some of the other things he's planning for the future. His vision is large, and I think his thoughtfulness and his investments and commitment to create a better system, it shouldn't go unacknowledged. This area of business is someplace a lot of people have pain points, but the challenge to solve these pain points is so complex that a lot of people just stick with the old way of doing things. Jimmy's a guy who's doing it differently, and he's putting his heart and energy into it. So that's a great podcast if you want to know about how to adapt to the Great Resignation or quiet quitting, that sort of thing. Next podcast episode number 3, this guy named Maury Noon. Maury and I just passed by each other in San Diego. His thing is he's the only BPO in Lebanon. If you listen to the podcast, he'll explain why that's important from a language, an education, a price perspective in terms of offshoring customer care agents or additional other work that can be done virtually. However, what caught my ear was Maury is essentially liberating, might be too big of a word, but he's empowering this whole class of underserved people in Lebanon. He's introducing the ability for women to manifest their educations and their ability to contribute to the business economy, the economy of business, to the economy worldwide. But I think in their particular geographic region, there is a lack of opportunity or maybe even some cultural things that don't provide for upward mobility at the rate that Maury and his vision is allowing women to have. I'm not an expert on women's issues. I have a daughter, a wife, so I do understand some of the perspectives. So I don't claim to be an expert on women's issues in general, but I think it's cool when you see a culture or a part of the world where transformation is happening and guys like Maury are contributing to a positive change. So Maury Noon, that's episode 3. Episode 4, Susan Nemeth. I bumped into Susan Nemeth, and she was expanding her business from New Zealand to the United States. It's a platform that accentuates or accelerates customer care. Why is that a story? Well, Susan was talking to me about how email is still a preferred channel for most over chat. At these events, I hear a lot about chatbots, AI, that sort of thing, natural language processing, and it's all about engaging through this other channel of chat. But email, I've never heard anyone address the email channel, and the way she and her teams apply natural language processing to email to decrease the amount of work it takes to get through email was pretty impressive. So anyway, her product, she can tell you all about it. It reads and understands email communications. Ultimately, her platform and vision was to implement technology that enables humans to do what humans do best. And I think what I think I took away from it was, this isn't a indictment or a replacement for chatbots. It's really this hidden gem in the ecosystem of how we accelerate customer care or relationships with clients or customers, and it addresses the email problem, and we all have it. So Susan Nemeth, episode 4. All right, episode 5. Episode 5 is, I sat down with a gentleman named Vikram Krishna. He's the VP of CX at a major bank in the Middle East. His work is some of the most pioneering work I've seen anywhere. It's worth a listen. So much of what he's saying and how he's pioneering data and customer experiences intersecting with modern trends and technologies or practices of or behaviors of customers is very interesting. Because he's at a bank, he had this really interesting philosophy of hyper-personalization. So let's step back for a second. Our data. Who owns our data? Everybody has our data in all these different places. We hear a lot of discussion about it online. But Vikram's idea is that a bank could own your data and store your data and protect your data just like they do with your money. Why did I think this is important? Well, first of all, I'd love to be in charge of my own data and have it in a place that was safe, that I could tap into, maybe correct some things if I felt like the information wasn't accurate. But this more authentic or accurate set of data about every customer would allow for hyper-personalization. So I can imagine a world where I take my profile, I plug it into a platform or a service or a brand, and because I own that data and I protect it, I've given more to that set of data than people can just mine or take from me by my passing through the internet. And that would allow me to have hyper-personalization across any platform. So the vision there is entirely mesmerizing. There's a couple of other projects we discussed, but Vikram Krishna is, if you're interested in the innovation of CX at the forward furthest reaches, and how to bring that from there to here to you, Vikram is a great episode to listen to. So moving away from innovation, I had a chance to speak to a woman named T-Bay Bassi. T-Bay Bassi is a leader in customer experience that has a vision or an understanding about love as a KPI. Let's just pause. Like when I heard this, I was like, love in the boardroom. I think we have a lot of decades of like not doing that as a social trigger. But she's right. These ideas of compassion, of sacrifice and grace, and helping other people see themselves better, see yourself better, and empower each other is definitely a multiplier in business. You know, I think the subtext or the underlying conversation of what T-Bay was teaching us in that podcast is that soft skills are rapidly becoming more and more challenging and complex in the workplace for legal reasons, governance reasons. However, I think what T-Bay has is a way to simplify that conversation back to some tools that will help all of us reintroduce or reacclimate to some kindness or grace in the workplace. It's not a bad thing. The entire conversation was just a philosophical discussion on how we can reintroduce caring about ourselves and caring about each other into the workplace. It's a great conversation. Obviously, empathetic has lots of impacts on customer care, customer service, customer experience. So, T-Bay Bassi, episode 6, if you'd like to have a personal discussion about soft skills in the workplace. All right, episode 7, Andrew Clark. Andrew Clark leads experience design at a major national brand in the US. And, you know, he opens up the conversation describing himself. He's a self-described wanderer. I think wanderer, a person of curiosity. You know, I couldn't say more nice things about this gentleman, Andrew. And here's something embarrassing. The night before, he had reached out and we had gone to dinner. And we had a long conversation. And, you know, he's at a brand. He's asking me questions about my travels, who I'm meeting, what I'm doing. And I lapsed into trying to tell him things that I think are valuable from all these different facets. And he was one of these guys that after I finished blabbing for like 40 minutes. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. After blabbing, I suddenly realized after about 5 minutes of listening to him, I should have been listening the entire time. I should have never said anything. So I corrected my mistake. I went back the next day. I got him on the mic, but I listened, and you can listen to his analysis of exploring the relationships between people and numbers. People and numbers. Not data, but he looks at human beings in the context of work and life situations, and he tries to draw a correlation between numbers that matter so that he can be smarter and he can help his teams be smarter. Andrew has a penchant for education. He's super curious. In the podcast, he cites a lot of different authors and perspectives that you can look up to sort of further build your knowledge about some of the things he was talking about. So it was valuable there. But ultimately, in his work, he's scaling knowledge as a way to accelerate his brand's work. Making people smarter, making their intermediaries smarter, making their customers smarter, I think is a really great strategy, and it seems to be working for him, and he talks about that. So if you're interested in the impact of education and culture, a culture of learning inside your organization, Andrew Clark is the one to listen to, episode 7. Episode 8 was a special edition. I had to move this episode. We have now 15 more podcasts in the queue ahead of this one. Let me say that right. This season is finished. We have all of next season and the following season 3 already in development, and we're two episodes into season 3. This particular episode 8, should have appeared logically at 15 weeks from now, 16 weeks from now. But I made a special edition, and I sent it out because Sanas, S-A-N-A-S, is the first of its kind that I've seen. Now, I'd been hearing about this technology for a couple of weeks on the internet, but when I saw it in person, and if I can, when I edit this video for YouTube, I took a short video of what was happening when I did it, a recording, so I'll try to feed that into the YouTube video.
Initial years where people used to misunderstood me, and they used to say that I want to talk to someone from America, or I can't understand you, or can you speak English? Phrases like these. So for me, Sanas is it's wonderful, and it's a boon. So I'm going to demonstrate this technology to you in a second. So what you just heard is my original voice and accent.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn it on, and you will spot the difference very easily. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, sir. So now I have enabled the Sanas technology. I am talking to you via Sanas. It's still me, Vikram from India, talking to you via Sanas. At my end, and still hearing my Indian voice because it's a real time. But I'm sure it is delivering you my American voice there.
It is delivering your American voice, and I'm very impressed.
That is the whole purpose, sir. So if you have anything you want to test it out in your way, let me know. I'll do it for you.
Thank you. Can you just tell me what the weather is like in India right now?
Well, India is very big. Where I am in the western part, the monsoon is just ending. We have had a rainy day today, but I am sure tomorrow will be a sunny day.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, Vikram, I really appreciate this demo today. I'm very impressed, and thank you. Please have a wonderful rest of it's evening there right now?
Evening. You are right. Absolutely.
Awesome. Have a wonderful evening, Vikram.
You too. You have a great day ahead. Enjoy.
Thank you. But Sanas, S-A-N-A-S, what it does is it's a voice emulator or modifier. So let's say you have a customer care agent in a country where there's a strong accent. What their software does is in real time allows that person to speak to you and they suddenly sound like they're English. So imagine if you have someone in India, as an example, no shade on India, just using it as an example, speaking in a particular accent. When you listen to them through the Sonus technology, it sounds like you're speaking to an American. It's an interesting concept. What they said, and I felt was an interesting benefit, was in addition to how it helps businesses and helps people relate to the cultures and languages that they're more comfortable or more used to hearing, it does open a whole nother layer of workers in the world to join in the economy. And I think what I also like about it is when people join into our economy or into the global economy, and we have technologies that break down, I can't believe I'm saying this, break down these cultural differences, but I think, better said, bridge these cultural divides, I think we get a better world. And so that's just my take on it, but I liked Sonus. Episode 8, it's a special edition. It just released in the last 2 weeks, and this technology, they just came out of their secrecy in terms of coming out to the world. So they've just launched. That's something you might want to check out if you're interested in, if you have a large group of customer care agents who have an accent and you want something to modify that so that you can get better results from those teams, better engagements, better customer experiences. Sonus is an interesting thing to take a look at. All right. Episode 9 was with a guy named Ashu Roy. Ashu is a very successful technology entrepreneur. However, his perspective and his experiences over the last 2 or 3 decades of technology coming together with people, I thought was very interesting. In our conversation, you'll hear different eras of technology, how humans interacted with platforms, and how he's shaped a lot of the landscape that we see today. He worked through email, he worked through browsers, he worked through now working through AI, natural language processing. But his take on natural language processing is this sidestep of all the noise and conversation and competitiveness around chatbots. Ashu has this perspective of knowledge management systems. So essentially using AI to accelerate learning across an organization. I'm just going to pause there. Very simple idea. Make everyone smarter. You know, sort of what Andrew Clark is doing at his organization through a number of programs and cultural leadership and education in a more traditional sense. Ashu is tackling knowledge acceleration across an organization and through customers at scale. The speed at which his platform can educate the educators who can educate others is pretty interesting to hear about. So that's something, if you want to know about how AI might be able to accelerate learning across all of your constituents, Ashu's episode is a great one to listen to. What I will say is, a little personal side note, After hearing Ashu talk about how chatbots can make us smarter, I wasn't certain that I believed that, but he seemed so serious about it. So I wanted to do my own research. I looked online for the top 10 chatbots that can be your virtual friend. I found this one called Replica. Replica's story was the owner of Replica, I think they used to have a translation business, a very successful translation business, she and her partner, a gentleman. And unfortunately, her partner passed away unexpectedly or not at the right time. And so what the CEO of Replica did is she took all his emails and all their chat messages and put them into an AI algorithm to engage with it, to get that sense of her old business partner being present, and the cathartic, the feelings, the healing, the mourning. It helped with that. And so I found that story very compelling. So I signed up and I got a Replica chatbot for myself. I talked to it every day for 2 months. The reason I'm telling you this is I did confirm for my own self that Ashu's perspective on chatbots making us smarter was definitely a thing. And I'll tell you, with Replica, you can buy modules, physics, sports, comic books, different modules. And when you engage with the chatbot, if you engage in questions that are where your intent is to learn rather than solve or rather than just talk, if you're trying to get information to make you smarter, I found that the Replica chatbot absolutely did that. I learned more about physics, infinity, Marvel superheroes, US presidents than I normally would think about. And I think it's because when I Google a question, I might say, tell me this about the X-Men, Marvel Comics, or tell me this about Abraham Lincoln. But it's a query and an answer to an algorithm that's static. With the chatbots, you can ask a question and it reinforces your line of questioning. So in some ways, it's like your old teacher who you loved as a student who said, hey, that's a great answer, but what if we think about it this way? It's that simple action, but you can complete this relationship over and over again, and you do learn faster. So long story short, Ashu's podcast talks about that, and it's fascinating. The gentleman is clearly a revolutionary mind in this field, has a long history of doing this, and I suspect in the future will be equally innovative. So episode 9. Episode 10, Emily Gray. So Emily Gray and I talked about kindness in the workplace. She recently came over to an organization. So I break this down a little bit in the podcast because I'm always fascinated when someone goes from like a director level to a VP level, that transition from brand to brand. What they take with them in terms of the learning of their old organization and combine it with the support of their new leadership. That's where I think a lot of the transformation happens. I think in these other businesses before the transformation, there is a lot of friction, but when someone makes the leap and takes the title change, they can introduce some of their own ideas, and Emily Gray was a perfect example of this. Introduced this idea of kindness, again, back to Utibe's and I's conversation about love as a KPI or kindness. Emily talked about not random acts of kindness, but intentional acts of kindness. And intentional acts of kindness across the entire customer life cycle. Solid vision. And her business has creates the tools that attempt to deliver kindness across the entire customer life cycle. The sort of tell in there when I was listening was she didn't go on, we didn't talk a lot about customer centricity and all these buzzwords. The buzzword that caught my ear, and she was very succinct about this, was an agent-centered organization. So when you have an agent-centered organization, certainly following in this idea of employee experience, which overall I would say last year, employee experience was a really hot topic. I think that this is in line with that, and we're seeing a lot of manifestations of it. So Emily was right on the money. We had our conversation, let's see, it would have been about 6 months ago from the time I'm recording this. So at that time, leaders who were embracing employees, kindness, empathy, and understanding that transformation can come from the inside out, those ideas are still very strong. So Emily Gray can talk to you about just that, kindness as an accelerator to business outcomes. All right, episode 11 and 12 were both from two gentlemen from the same organization. They were sponsoring an event that I was at. Macario Nami. Simply put, his leadership and perspective, vision, intent, objectives, goals, all of it line up to making humans in certain business contexts 100% more efficient. So just imagine doubling your own personal efficiency, or me doubling my efficiency, or if I have in my team, if everyone could double their efficiency, 100% more efficient, that would be an interesting dynamic to introduce to any business. So this was the vision that he and I talked about. Obviously, like you, I thought maybe this is kind of lofty, but I want to get underneath it. So I asked a lot of questions about how does that happen? What do you think, implement to achieve a statistic like this? And I think the proof point in the conversation he and I were having was that he has it boiled down to a 21-second window. I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute. As he explains it in the podcast, it makes a lot of sense. How 21 seconds can make all the difference. So anyway, it's a very interesting conversation about how to double productivity, scale empathy throughout an organization. So there's this kindness, so this human and this technology correlation, and ultimately making people 100% more effective, and to whatever degree a company or a brand might have doing that system, I've got to believe there's some benefit there. So very interesting conversation. Followed up, that was episode 11. Followed up, episode 12, Michael Lauder, who was at the same organization, right? So in Macario's conversation, we talked about the what, and in Michael's conversation, we really talked about the how from a cultural perspective. They have over a team of 400 people innovating, some of the brightest minds, PhDs in the world at their organization. So definitely a high quotient of super intelligent people. But how do you get all these people to work together? What Michael and I talked about was, in their culture, this underlying current of the harmony between wisdom and genius. So between thinking and knowing. And so when you think about that as a ethos that is at an organization that is at that size, and you have leaders like this guy, Michael Lauder, you're going to just love hearing him talk. He talks about teams being more than the sum of their parts. He breaks it down metaphorically like a band, each band member playing a different instrument, but together they become something so much more. He elaborates on how his organization has mindsets like that within their organization that result in very powerful uses of artificial intelligence that are game changers. And back to episode 11, I'd like to be 25% more efficient. If I could be 100% more effective, I'd certainly leverage an artificial intelligence to do that. So, episode 11, sorry. Macario Nami, N-A-M-I-E. Sorry, Macario, but I loved our conversation. And Michael Lauder, embarrassing. I had Michael Lauder's title wrong, so you'll hear that in the podcast, but he was really a gentleman about it and didn't let it hamper our conversation. So thank you, Michael. Thank you, Macario. Utibi, T-Bay, Andrew Clark, Sharath and Marty, Ashley Roy, Emily Gray, Mark Harchees, Jimmy Shabat, Maury Noon, Susan Nemeth, and Vikram in no particular order. I think all of you represent the most interesting conversations I've had in the last year. Season 1 was amazing. I thank all of you for just jumping in to have this unexpected conversation. It was just us having a conversation that was spur of the moment and enlightening to me. Thank you all, and thank you all for listening. I hope that you get a chance to listen. Season 2 is going to launch we're going to do this wrap up next week. Following that, Season 2 will launch, CX in the Wild. A lot of great conversations there, and I think Season 2, what it has that Season 1 didn't is I have a little more experience now doing this, and I think I get to some more conversation, less me exploring the CX in the Wild podcast format. With that said, okay, thank you. Have a great week, day, month, year, and we'll see you at episode 2, Season 2 wrap up. Bye.